March 28, 1961. On a desk in Washington sits a single-page budget memo, 5 paragraphs long. The president signs it. 3,600 miles away, in a hangar in Palmdale, California, engineers are still bolting together an airplane that does not yet have wings that have ever left the ground. That airplane is the XB-70 Valkyrie. 6 engines, 250,000 pounds, a wingspan longer than the Wright brothers' first flight. It is built to fly at 3 times the speed of sound, at 70,000 feet, so high and so fast that in 1961, nothing on Earth is supposed to be able to touch it. The memo Kennedy just signed kills it anyway. Not because it failed a test, not because it crashed, not because the engineering was wrong. The airplane that was supposed to make Soviet air defense obsolete gets canceled by a piece of paper before it ever proves it can fly, killed by a weapon it never had to face in combat and never even had the chance to. 3 years later, it will fly. It will hit Mach 3. It will set records that still stand. And none of it will matter, because the war it was built to win had already ended in Washington, not over Moscow. This is the story of the fastest bomber America ever built, and the memo that made it obsolete before it existed. By 1955, the United States Air Force believes it has already solved the hardest problem in nuclear war. How do you get a bomber over Moscow and back alive? The answer sitting on every runway in Strategic Air Command is the B-52 Stratofortress. 8 engines, subsonic. It cruises at roughly 500 miles per hour, 30-some thousand feet over the Earth, and for a moment in history, that is enough. Soviet interceptors of the early 1950s are not fast enough to consistently catch it. Soviet radar is patchy. The B-52 does not need to outrun anything. It only needs to be higher and steadier than what is chasing it. That is the law. Not written down anywhere, but believed by every general, every engineer, every war planner in Omaha. Altitude is armor. A bomber flying high enough, on a straight enough line, is safe by the simple mathematics of intercept geometry. The Soviets cannot get a fighter to that altitude fast enough, cannot get a missile that far, cannot close the gap before the bomber is gone. It is a law built on a narrow window of time, though nobody is required to say so out loud. Soviet interceptor speeds are climbing every year. Soviet radar coverage is thickening along every border. And the same missile technology that America is racing to put in its own silos, solid fuel, guided ascent, terminal accuracy, is being developed on the other side of the Iron Curtain for a very different purpose: killing airplanes, not launching them. Nobody at Wright-Patterson Air Force Base is thinking about that yet. In 1955, the entire American nuclear deterrent rests on one physical assumption: that a bomber flying high and fast enough will always outrun what is built to stop it, and no one has yet built the machine that will test that assumption to its absolute limit. That machine does not exist yet. Its answer to high enough will not be 30,000 feet. It will be 70,000, more than 13 miles above the Earth, where the sky is nearly black at noon. Its answer to fast enough will not be 500 miles an hour. It will be Mach 3, 3 times the speed of sound, fast enough to outrun almost anything that flies. The law says altitude and speed are armor. In 4 years, 1 aircraft will be built to prove that law completely, permanently true. The problem is that somewhere in Moscow, another set of engineers is about to prove it isn't. In October 1954, the Air Force issues General Operational Requirement Number 38, a document with a plain bureaucratic title and an almost impossible ask buried inside it. Replace the B-52, match its range, match its payload, and do something the B-52 was never built to do: survive inside Soviet airspace long enough to matter as Soviet defenses catch up. 6 months later, the requirement sharpens. The Air Force wants a bomber that can cruise at Mach 0.9 across most of its route, then push to the maximum possible speed for the final 1,000 miles into hostile territory, the stretch where interceptors and radar are thickest. It is codified as Weapon System 110A. 6 contractors are invited to bid. Only 2 answer with serious designs: Boeing and North American Aviation, the company that built the P-51 Mustang over Europe a decade earlier and is now building the X-15 rocket plane for NASA. On November 8, 1955, both companies receive Phase 1 development contracts. What they designed first looks nothing like what will eventually fly. Both proposals feature enormous jettisonable wingtip fuel tanks, floating pods the size of a B-47 bomber, bolted onto each wing, meant to be dropped once their fuel burns off, shrinking the aircraft into a smaller, faster shape for the dash through enemy defenses. In September 1956, the Air Force looks at both designs and rejects them outright. Too large, too complicated. Takeoff weights approaching 700,000 pounds. Aircraft too big for existing runways, too big for existing hangars. Both companies go back to the drawing board, and in that redesign, the requirement itself changes. On September 18, 1957, the Air Force issues new performance targets that abandon compromise entirely. A cruising speed of Mach 3.0 to 3.2, sustained. Not a brief dash, but the entire mission profile. An altitude of 70,000 to 75,000 feet. A range past 10,000 miles. This is no longer a faster B-52. This is a demand for an aircraft that spends its entire operational life at the edge of what metal and fuel and human engineering can survive. On December 23, 1957, the Air Force makes its decision. North American Aviation's design is declared the winner. 1 month later, on January 24, 1958, the development contract is signed. In February, the aircraft receives its formal designation, B-70. A public naming contest draws more than 20,000 submissions before the Air Force settles on the name that will define it, Valkyrie, for the Norse maidens who choose which warriors die in battle. North American Aviation now has a mandate that no aircraft manufacturer on Earth has ever been asked to fulfill. Build a 250-ton airplane, made almost entirely of stainless steel, that survives sustained flight at 3 times the speed of sound. There is no textbook for this. There is no precedent. The engineers assigned to the Valkyrie are about to solve a problem that does not yet have a name. At Mach 3, an airplane does not fly through the air. It fights it. At 3 times the speed of sound, air stops behaving like a fluid the wing can simply slide through. It compresses violently against every leading edge, heating the metal skin to temperatures north of 300 degrees Celsius, hot enough that the Valkyrie's own airframe grows measurably longer in flight, stretching several inches from nose to tail as the metal expands under heat. Aluminum, the material of every airliner and fighter jet before it, would soften and fail at those temperatures. So North American Aviation's engineers make a decision that has never been attempted at this scale. They build the entire aircraft, nose to tail, out of stainless steel and titanium honeycomb panels. Thin sheets of metal brazed to a lightweight internal lattice, the same principle as cardboard packaging, except formed from steel and fused at temperatures hot enough to melt conventional aircraft rivets. The panels warp. They crack in early production runs. Engineers spend years solving a manufacturing problem that has no precedent, no supplier, and no textbook, because no one has ever needed to mass-produce steel honeycomb before. That solves survival. It does not solve flight. A conventional aircraft loses lift as it accelerates past the speed of sound. The shock waves that form off its nose and wings create drag, not lift. North American's engineers look at that same shock wave and see something different: pressure. A wall of compressed air, sitting just beneath the aircraft, doing nothing but pushing down on the runway below. Their solution is compression lift, using the aircraft's own supersonic shock wave as a cushion of high-pressure air trapped beneath the wing, generating lift for free from a phenomenon that normally only creates drag. To make it work, the Valkyrie's wingtips do something no aircraft wing had ever done before. They fold. Hydraulic actuators drive each outer wing panel, sections the size of a fighter jet's entire wingspan, downward on command. At subsonic cruise, the tips hang at 25 degrees. Above Mach 1.4, they drop further still to a full 65 degrees, sealing the shockwave underneath the aircraft like a hand cupping water. The effect is not subtle. At cruise speed, compression lift supplies roughly 30% of the Valkyrie's total lift, nearly a third of a 250-ton aircraft, held aloft by a shockwave the aircraft generates itself. The folding tips do a second job at the same time. They restore the directional stability a slender delta wing loses as it approaches Mach 3, letting engineers use a smaller tail than the aircraft would otherwise need. 6 General Electric YJ-93 engines, each producing close to 30,000 pounds of thrust with afterburner, sight clustered beneath the wing root, feeding from a single rectangular intake that has to manage air moving at 3 times the speed of sound before it ever reaches the compressor blades. None of it has ever been built before. None of it has ever been proven in the air. And by the time North American Aviation is ready to prove it, the political ground underneath the entire program has already started to shift. By the end of 1959, the Valkyrie's fiercest enemy is not Soviet engineering. It is Washington's budget office. On December 3, 1959, one day after taking office, the new Secretary of Defense, Thomas Gates, cuts the B-70 program down to a single flyable prototype, stripped of the military subsystems it would need to function as an actual bomber. On paper, the airplane that was supposed to replace the entire B-52 fleet is reduced to a research curiosity. For a moment, the program that was meant to define American air power for a generation is one signature away from irrelevance. Then politics intervenes and briefly, dramatically, saves it. 1960 is a presidential election year, and national security has become the defining argument of the campaign. Democratic candidates are hammering the Eisenhower administration over what they call the missile gap, the claim, later proven wildly overstated, that the Soviet Union has pulled decisively ahead of the United States in strategic weapons. Two of the loudest voices making that argument are sitting senators, John F. Kennedy of Massachusetts and Lyndon B. Johnson of Texas. Both publicly champion the B-70 as proof America cannot afford to fall behind. Johnson goes further, overseeing a 60-page congressional report arguing the program must be restored to full weapon system status, opening it with a personal letter making the case himself. The pressure works. In August 1960, the Air Force reverses the December cut entirely. The B-70 is restored as a full weapon system, with 12 additional prototypes added to the production plan. Congress backs the reversal with real money, a $265 million appropriation for fiscal year 1961 alone. North American Aviation is instructed to proceed with full design, development, and testing of a production run of YB-70s. For a brief window spanning less than a year, the Valkyrie is no longer a research airplane fighting for survival. It is, on paper, the future backbone of Strategic Air Command, a fleet of Mach 3 bombers that the two men most likely to become president have publicly staked their credibility on building. That window will not stay open long. The same men who saved the program as candidates are about to inherit it as decision-makers, and the missile gap they campaigned on is about to be proven by their own Pentagon to have never existed at all. May 1, 1960. 10 months before Kennedy takes office, a Soviet S-75 surface-to-air missile reaches an altitude of nearly 70,000 feet over Sverdlovsk and brings down an American U-2 spy plane, a subsonic aircraft flying almost exactly the altitude the Valkyrie is being built to fly, just faster. Pilot Francis Gary Powers survives, is captured, and becomes the center of an international incident. But the detail that matters to the B-70 program is quieter and far more damaging. It proves in front of the entire world that Soviet high-altitude air defense is no longer theoretical. The core assumption behind the Valkyrie, that altitude alone is armor, that nothing can climb high enough or fast enough to touch it, has just been publicly disproven by a missile system that predates the airplane meant to outrun it. 9 months later, John F. Kennedy is president. His new Secretary of Defense, Robert McNamara, arrives at the Pentagon as something the military has never had to answer to before. A systems analyst by training, a former Ford Motor Company executive who evaluates weapons programs the way he once evaluated production lines, by cost, by redundancy, by measurable return. McNamara looks at the B-70 program and sees 3 numbers he cannot justify. First, cost. Estimates for the aircraft are climbing towards $700 million per prototype in the dollars of the day, for a fleet that was supposed to number in the dozens. Second, redundancy. The United States is now deploying intercontinental ballistic missiles, weapons that reach Moscow in 30 minutes, carry no pilot to lose, and cannot be shot down by any interceptor or SAM battery yet built. Third, vulnerability. Soviet high-altitude defenses, the same technology that downed Gary Powers, are advancing faster than the Valkyrie's altitude and speed can outrun them. The doctrine forming under Kennedy and McNamara has a name: Flexible response. It reorients American strategy away from expensive, crude platforms and toward missiles, cheaper, faster, harder to intercept, and immune to the political cost of a captured or killed pilot. Manned bombers are not eliminated from that doctrine, but the specific mission the Valkyrie was purpose-built for, high-altitude penetration at sustained Mach 3, no longer fits the strategy the new administration has chosen to fund. On March 28, 1961, barely 2 months into his presidency, Kennedy delivers his budget message to Congress. Buried inside it is the sentence that ends the B-70 as a weapon of war. The program is to be reduced to research status only. No production fleet, no operational wing of 30 aircraft, no replacement for the B-52. 2 prototypes, already under construction, already too far along to abandon outright, will be completed as XB-70EAs. Flying laboratories, not bombers, restricted to the singular purpose of generating data on sustained high-speed flight for the Air Force and NASA. The men who saved this program as candidates a year earlier are the ones who kill it as office holders. Not because the engineering failed, not because a single test went wrong. The airplane has not yet left the ground under its own power. It is killed by a memo on the strength of an argument about doctrine and dollars, struck down by exactly the kind of weapon it was never designed to fight. A budget line, signed in Washington 3 years before the aircraft would ever prove, in the sky over California, that everything North American aviation promised was true. May 11, 1964, the first XB-70A, Air Vehicle 1, tail number 62-001, is rolled out of its hangar in Palmdale, California, in front of press cameras and Air Force officials. It is, by a wide margin, the largest and most radical aircraft anyone in that crowd has ever seen. 250,000 pounds of stainless steel, a wingspan over 105 feet, a delta silhouette that looks less like an airplane than a weapon from a future no one has built yet. It does not fly for another 4 months. On September 21, 1964, AV-1 lifts off from Palmdale and makes the short hop to Edwards Air Force Base, the Valkyrie's first flight, on an aircraft the president himself has already stripped of its mission. From the beginning, the airplane fights its pilots. Above Mach 2.5, AV-1 develops serious directional stability problems. The same folding wing tip, compression lift geometry that makes Mach 3 flight possible also makes the aircraft twitchy and difficult to control as it approaches that speed. In its entire flight test career, AV-1 will exceed Mach 3 exactly once. On October 14, 1965, it happens. AV-1 reaches Mach 3.02, over 2,000 miles per hour, faster than any bomber-class aircraft in American history, sustained at altitude rather than in a brief rocket-powered dash. It is a genuine engineering triumph. It is also, by then, a headline with no strategic purpose behind it. There is no fleet waiting to be built. There is no operational mission this record serves. It is a number set for its own sake, in an airplane the government has already decided it does not need. 6 weeks earlier, on July 17, 1965, the second prototype, AV-2, tail number 62-0207, makes its own first flight. North American's engineers have made one critical change: 5 additional degrees of dihedral built into the wing, a fix meant to solve the stability problems that plagued AV-1. It works. AV-2 becomes the more capable airframe of the pair, going on to complete 9 separate flights above Mach 3, eventually pushing the entire program's top recorded speed to Mach 3.08, nearly 3.5 times the speed of sound, at altitudes above 70,000 feet. By this point, the Valkyrie is flying almost exclusively for NASA and Air Force research, generating data on sonic booms, high-temperature structures, and sustained supersonic handling that will feed directly into America's civilian supersonic transport studies. The airplane built to penetrate Soviet airspace is now, in practice, a flying laboratory measuring how loud a shockwave sounds to people standing in a field in California. It is, in every technical sense, everything North American aviation promised the Air Force back in 1957. It can fly at Mach 3. It can sustain that speed at altitude. It can do what no bomber before or since has ever done. And in June of 1966, before the world can fully register what AV-2 has proven, a formation flight arranged for a magazine photograph will end the program's second airframe, and two of the men flying it in under 30 seconds. June 8, 1966, 09:26, local time, 17 miles northeast of Barstow, California. 5 aircraft climb into loose formation at 32,000 feet, not for a test, but for a photograph. General Electric, the manufacturer of the engines powering all 5 airplanes in the sky that morning, has arranged a publicity shoot for its shareholders. At the center of the formation flies AV-2, the more capable of the 2 Valkyries, piloted by North American's chief test pilot, Al White, with Air Force Major Carl Cross, a 40-year-old Vietnam veteran recently assigned to the program, in the co-pilot seat. Around them, tucked into a tight wedge, fly a T-38 Talon, an F-4 Phantom, an F-5, and an F-104N Starfighter, the smallest and closest aircraft in the formation, flown by NASA's chief test pilot Joe Walker, a veteran of 25 X-15 flights and a holder of world speed and altitude records in his own right. Walker's job is simple: hold formation off the Valkyrie's right wing while the photographs are taken. From his position, roughly 70 feet to the side and 10 feet below the massive delta wing towering over him, he has almost no visual reference for his own motion relative to the aircraft beside him. The photo shoot runs its course. The formation begins to loosen. Then, without warning, Walker's F-104 drifts inward. It clips the Valkyrie's drooping right wingtip. The impact flips the smaller jet up and over, rolling it inverted directly across the top of the bomber's tail. It shears off both of AV-2's vertical stabilizers and slams into the left wing before exploding into a fireball. Walker is killed instantly. For 16 seconds, the Valkyrie continues flying straight and level, its crew and the pilots around it still processing what has just happened. "Mid-air! Mid-air!" comes the call over the radio from a nearby T-38. Then, with both rudders gone and the left wing torn open, AV-2 rolls inverted and enters an uncontrollable flat spin. Al White reaches for the aircraft's escape capsule, an experimental clamshell ejection system unique to the XB-70, designed to seal around the pilot before firing clear of the aircraft. It closes on him before he is fully inside, crushing his arm in the mechanism as it fires. He survives, badly injured. Carl Cross, incapacitated by the violent forces of the spin, never activates his own ejection sequence. He goes down with the aircraft. 62,000 feet below where the formation had flown minutes earlier, AV-2 strikes the desert floor near Barstow and is destroyed on impact. 2 men are dead, one of them a working NASA legend, the other a test pilot with a young family, 3 days from a promotion he will never receive. Of the 2 Valkyries ever built, only one remains. After the crash, AV-1 keeps flying alone. It is now the only Valkyrie left on Earth and the only one capable of continuing the program's remaining research goals. Through 1967 and 1968, it flies a reduced but steady schedule for NASA and the Air Force, generating sonic boom data over the Mojave, testing structural response to sustained high-speed flight, feeding numbers into a supersonic transport program that, itself, is still years from any airplane the public will ever fly on. There is no fanfare in any of it, no headlines. A research aircraft, quietly finishing out a mission that was reduced to research status 7 years earlier by a memo no one in the cockpit had any control over. On February 4, 1969, AV-1 takes off for the last time. It does not land at Edwards, its home airfield for the entire flight test program. It flies directly to Wright-Patterson Air Force Base in Dayton, Ohio, and lands for the final time on the ramp of what will become the National Museum of the United States Air Force. There is no retirement ceremony that reaches the evening news. No formation flyover, no crowd of dignitaries, no speeches marking the end of the fastest bomber program America ever built. The aircraft that was supposed to define strategic air command for a generation is simply parked, drained of fuel, and left standing under museum lights, a 14-year engineering effort, over $1 billion in program cost, concluding not with a decision but with a routine flight to storage. Contrast that with where the program began, a public naming contest that drew 20,000 entries, a president publicly staking his campaign credibility on the airplane, congressional appropriations measured in the hundreds of millions of dollars. The Valkyrie's ending offers none of that theater. Its war ended 8 years before its flying did, on a March afternoon in 1961, in a budget document most Americans never read. Everything after that point, all the record flights, all the engineering triumphs, all the data quietly filed away for programs the public would never directly see, was a research program finishing out its assignment. The aircraft that was too advanced to build in numbers and too expensive to justify against a missile ends its operational life the same way most retired research aircraft do, parked, intact, and almost entirely unnoticed. Its legacy, unlike its ending, does not stay quiet for long. The company that built the Valkyrie does not survive as an independent name for long. In 1967, North American Aviation merges with Rockwell Standard to form North American Rockwell. In 1973, the company renames itself again, Rockwell International, folding its aircraft division into a new unit called North American Aircraft Operations. That division goes on to design and build another supersonic bomber, the B-1 Lancer, a variable sweep-wing strategic aircraft that first flies in 1974, enters service in 1986, and remains in active Air Force service today. The B-1 abandons the Valkyrie's central bet, high-altitude, high-speed penetration, in favor of low-altitude terrain-hugging flight, precisely because the same Soviet SAM threat that killed the B-70 program in 1961 has, by the 1970s, only gotten worse. In a very real sense, the B-1 is Rockwell's answer to the lesson the Valkyrie was forced to learn the hard way. Speed and altitude alone are not survival. In December 1996, Rockwell sells its entire aerospace and defense portfolio, including the B-1 program and the engineering lineage that traces back through North American Aviation to the Valkyrie itself, to the Boeing Company. The B-1 fleet, Boeing sustains and modernizes today, flying combat and training missions for the United States Air Force, carries a design heritage that runs in an unbroken corporate line back to the same factory floors in Southern California where engineers once brazed together the first stainless steel honeycomb panels for AV-1. Judged purely on engineering, the Valkyrie's design team was right about almost everything they set out to prove. Compression lift worked. Sustained Mach 3 flight at altitude in an aircraft of that size was achievable. Not theoretical, not marginal, but demonstrated repeatedly in the sky over California. What the engineers could not control, and could not have been expected to, was the pace of a parallel revolution happening in missile guidance and warhead miniaturization. A revolution that made the entire strategic argument for a Mach 3 penetrating bomber obsolete before the airplane meant to prove it ever left the runway. The Valkyrie was not defeated in combat. It never flew one combat mission, never dropped one weapon in anger. It was defeated by a memo, written by men who had championed it a year earlier as candidates, signed the moment those same men became responsible for its cost instead of its symbolism. One aircraft remains today, standing under museum lights in Dayton, Ohio, the only physical proof that the promise was real. The war it was built to fight ended in a budget office, 3 years before the airplane itself ever left the ground. If you want to see how this same pattern, a machine built to win a war that changed shape before it arrived, played out with an armored gunship over Vietnam, the story of the AH-56 Cheyenne is waiting in this channel's back catalog. And if today's story earned it, subscribing costs nothing and keeps documentaries like this one coming.